Well, thank you. As you might imagine, I haven't always been this wonderful. We wore these, by the way, Molson and I did for Harris, and it was quite a sacrifice. But he's cute. He's so cute. You just, you got to go with what he suggests. But enough is enough. I have a couple items that I need to take care of first. There was a woman before this meeting tonight that came up to me. She was in Austin recovery, and she was interested in finding out about meetings in Lakeway. And I've been looking around for her. I can't see her. There you are. Kathy, would you stand up over there? That's the woman you need to talk to after the meeting. Good. Okay. We got that done. I'm really grateful to be here. Were we married? I've really enjoyed the other speakers here over the last, I guess, 18 months or 2 years, whatever it is. And I never expected really to be up here, mainly because of this stuff. This is the first time I've had shoes on since last winter. I'd like to preface my comments tonight by thanking the committee for asking me to speak. It's an honor. Citywide's been a wonderful thing for AA, and I'd like to compliment them. In the last couple of years, they and the Primary Purpose Group have started, and they've both been very successful. And the turnout itself is an indication of the need and the demand and the success of those groups. And I want to commend you. I also would like to compliment the committee for setting up the young people's meeting. As I will tell you later, I've been in AA for a lot of years, and too often it seems to me that the young people come in and they don't have other young people to associate with and learn from, and old fossils like myself try to turn them into old men. And so I really think that it's a good thing, and I wanted to compliment you for doing that. It's well done. It's wonderful to see old friends as well as new ones. And I want you to know that if I owe you an apology, you have it. And if I owe you any money, it's going to take a little longer. I wouldn't have believed it a number of years ago, but I have family here that I love very much, and I'd like them to stand up and be recognized. My wife, Rebecca, son, Garner, my brother-in-law, Joe, and my sister and her daughter. My sister is Kathy with a K, and Amanda Lou is my sister is trying to turn Amanda Lou into the perfection of herself, and Amanda Lou's been resisting, and I'm proud of her for that. I'm really honored that they came, and I hope I don't embarrass them too much. Anything I say tonight is of my own construction and should not be inferred in any way as instructions to anyone else. Please consult the big book and your sponsor and your group. about how really to do AA. I'm going to just give you some of my experience. Because of my complete lack of qualification, I have an aversion to describing God. It seems to me that the AA program is a guide to utilizing God to heal our spirit and thus negate the need to drink. I've experienced and trust that it is a practical program available to everyone. Humility and making friends with reality are a significant goal for a contented life. They say that the highest you get in AA is human, but it's quite a leap for some of us. Guy Stratton years ago over in Bolden used to say this AA program isn't a very good program. It's just barely worked a number of times in the last 30 years. My name is Tom Christie, and I am an alcoholic. My sobriety date this time is March 1st, 1981. Hi, everybody. I say that because I attempted to stop drinking in New York, Washington, D.C., St. Louis, and finally, Austin, Texas. In D.C., during my first stint in rehab, I experienced unexpectedly relief from fear and worry for a short time. I recalled that while we were there, we were held AA meetings around the D.C. area where a different old man at every meeting in a church basement would set up a little shrine of the Big Book and the 12 and 12 and these two little pamphlets on partnership and acceptance. Although the pamphlets are not AA approved, Mosen and I buy them by the boxload, and they seem to help people as much today as they did me when I finally read them 4 years later. One evening, a young woman spoke at a meeting and said, "I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic, and the most important thing I did today was not take the first drink." I can't tell you how deeply sorry I felt for those people. Besides, I knew that the way that they were talking, that it would be impossible to live that way, even though I didn't understand the words they were using. I'd never heard most of the words before. I'd never really heard acceptance. I hadn't heard the word resentment. I hadn't heard about Alcoholics Anonymous. I hadn't heard a lot of the words that are used in AA. I was sure that if needed to be, I could quit on my own. After my stay there, I didn't drink for 4 hours. I thought that for a guy like me, a glass of wine to celebrate wouldn't hurt a thing, but the craving that up till then was only academic became real in my life, and I didn't stop drinking again until 4 months later in St. Louis, when members of AA took me under their wing, and I began to experience true friendship without an ulterior motive. I'm sure that perhaps I had experienced that before, but this time I was dry enough to notice. I stayed sober for 4 months. Gradually, things became a great deal worse. For the next few years, I went in and out of alcohol rehab, inpatient and outpatient, VA hospitals, and psychiatric facilities. Once, when I was confined to a VA hospital, a patient came in and lamented that they had shot John Lennon. I had a moment of clarity. looked at him and I said, "We're in a nut house. I don't think that has anything to do with us." In addition to alcoholism, I was mentally ill but would not find that out until many years later. In the past, I viewed these attempts at sobriety as failures. They were not. What they were was learning through experience and education. Before I came to AA the first time, I never had a place to go back to. There really was nothing entertaining or humorous about my descent into alcoholism and mental illness, and very little heroism in the slow path of recovery. It truly has been of the gradual and educational variety. Prior to my devolving into alcoholism, I had been a success as a businessman, and I'd been an Army officer in combat. My heavy drinking caused sporadic problems, but most of my friends and associates drank like me. There must be something in addition to heavy drinking that tips the balance, or there would be many more of us. That, of course, is the province of medical professionals. Don't get me wrong, I had the usual outcome of alcohol addiction. I had strange bruises and physical wounds. I was in fights, legal problems, had DWIs, and I'm sure that many of you have experienced the same. I began to do absurd things, have absurd thoughts. Debilitating and inexplicable fears, terrors, and sleeplessness became the norm. As is mentioned in the chapter of Vision for You, I became acquainted with the four horsemen of terror, bewilderment, frustration, and despair. I was physically addicted to alcohol and probably had been for some time. At the time, I didn't know that excessive drinking or drug use really does change the makeup and of the brain. For me, it did, and it took a long time for that to work out. I was arrested many times and began going into mental health institutions, voluntarily and involuntarily. It is truly frightening how being incarcerated, despised, full of fear, and looked down upon can become normal. I hope never to return to that existence. I once asked a group of resident doctors at Shoal Creek Hospital if they had ever seen a pure alcoholic or drug addict without other problems. They looked at me like I had 3 ears and said, absolutely not. Excuse me. The last inpatient treatment center I was in Austin, a predecessor to Austin Recovery. It was called 98 Red River. It was an old house with many beds covered in plastic because some of us leaked. It had an extensive 3-day treatment program. I was told by a counselor, Toasty, she said, "I don't have time for you. You already know how to stay sober, you just haven't done it. Go back to AA." That was direct enough, short enough, and doable enough that I did it. I went to Bolden, Northland, and to a psychiatrist. I didn't care which worked, and it turned out I needed all three. I met my first sponsor, Bob Miller, down at Bolden. I didn't expect to stay sober, but I wanted a job, and I thought he had a Volkswagen dealership. And I wanted to be able to tell the counselor at the next rehab that I went to that I had a sponsor. because those of you who have been in there know they always ask the same damn questions. Bob told me that no one deserved to be sober and have a successful, happy life more than me. Well, I hadn't been talked to like that in years, so I stayed around. I told him that I desperately wanted to stop drinking, but if a drink were there right then, at that time, I would take it. He said, to my amazement, he said, "Good. Alcoholics Anonymous is not for people who never have the desire to drink again, but those who do and do something else instead." The something else is go to meetings, read the big book, talk to a sponsor, and pray. Honesty jumped out at me, and I said, well, I can do that. And I guess I can. I'd been trying not to want to drink, and that was not in my power. Bob also said that I didn't understand the English language, which offended me. He said that I didn't know the difference between agreement and acceptance, and indeed I did not. He told me I had been attempting to agree that I was an alcoholic rather than looking at my history and the evidence in my life and accepting the truth that was there. He said that if I could accept that I was an alcoholic, then there were things that I could do. He suggested that if what I had told him about my history and my inability to stop drinking, even with all of these rehabs, that I should sit in the front row of AA, raise my hand, and say something. He specifically said that I should do this if I wanted to drink that day. I was very concerned that I might say something wrong. Bob assured me that there were only members of AA in the room, and they were probably thinking of themselves and not listening. I'd like to apologize now to some of the old-timers that were around for my rantings. With the concept of acceptance, I needed to learn to let anyone do and be whoever they wanted to be. And this has been difficult, and it's an ongoing task. I learned that my irritation at others' actions and ideas could lead me back to drinking. I had to change the way that I thought in order to stay sober. Kathy? This was very different, and I found out I couldn't do it without the 12 steps. In those days, we had long philosophical discussions about God's will. And of course I participated even though I didn't know anything about it. Toward the end of one of our meetings, Jim Hughes said that he thought that God's will was for him not to drink. I stole this theological concept from Jim and made it my own. There are a lot of unpleasant things about drinking for me, some of which I've mentioned. One that I haven't is I threw up a lot. I don't know if anybody else did that. But, I haven't done that since I stopped drinking. It's been a miracle in my life. From some friends at Bolden, I learned many things to do and not to do. I was able to observe what worked and what didn't work. Going to meetings in order to see what happens to people that don't go to meetings. They come back in and say, well, I didn't go to meetings for 4 months. I'd been sober for 2, and I ended up in jail, And you say, maybe I ought to consider keeping going to these meetings. I began to understand what some of the words meant. One evening I mentioned to a friend of mine, Bob P., that my shoulder hurt. Bob said, Tom, I'm a carpenter, and when my shoulder hurts, it really hurts. Well, up to that time, I really didn't understand self-centeredness. But Bob gave me an example right in front of me. I remember well my first anniversary of AA, when I finally made it, where I was going to have a year being sober, after sitting in those stupid meetings for a whole year. Listen to those old guys talk about God. I figured I should be grateful. That was a word that they used around there a lot. I didn't have much experience with it myself, but I thought that I should be grateful. So I thought, well, maybe I should do something for the group. My first thought was, I'll buy a keg. That's when I began to believe that maybe I hadn't gotten the full course, that I hadn't really understood everything that people were talking about, and that maybe I should keep coming back. There were a lot of ups and downs in the first 4 or 5 years that I was sober. I really wouldn't recommend anybody do it the way that I did it, or have the experiences that I had in those first 4 or 5 years. A friend of mine, I think I saw him come in, Sandy, one day asked me if I wanted to go drinking. I told him I certainly would. But if I did, if my life was any worse, I wouldn't be able to stand it. Each time that I thought about drinking, each time there was an opportunity to drink, it seemed that there was always a stark choice between either drinking or getting more involved in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, as outlined in the Big Book. After 5 years of sobriety, I had to concede to myself that there had to be a power greater than myself that had kept me on the path of sobriety, because the longest I had ever been able to not drink before that had been 4 months. I was still using AA as kind of a group therapy. I would talk in meetings about what was wrong in my life, but I noticed that other people were not visiting with me afterwards. Very slowly, I realized that they went home in a happy mood, grateful that they were not me. When I told my sponsor about, how shall I put this, a relationship difficulty, a relationship issue. When I say that, I mean that's when when you don't know whether to kill them yourself, move to Canada, or, wreck your car. Those are issues. That's the way I have issues. When I told my sponsor, Bob, that, you know what he told me? He said, "Get off the cross, we need the wood." Fortunately, I didn't understand what he said, so it took me about a year to get mad about it. My next sponsor was Mac McLester. Some of you knew him. His patience in assisting me and changing the way I think was truly amazing. At first, I would only see him once a week on Sunday mornings. He wanted to take a meeting down to the 24-hour club that was down on Town Lake in those days. Fortunately, he didn't drive, so I became his wheels. I would have a list of questions, and he would give me answers with passages in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He told me, even though I thought I explained myself very well about how bad things were, that he didn't understand a lot of what I told him, and so we needed to adopt a common language, and by that he meant the language of the big book. Yes, things had gotten so bad, I'd gotten one of those big book sponsors. I never thought that I'd do that. I'm still saving bingo for, a real crisis. Mac, what are you laughing about down there? You've already played bingo. Mac said to me one day, he said, "Tom, apparently for you, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is not going to be sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism." I didn't like hearing it, but I knew that it was true. He told me that if I could find my problem in the big book, there would always be a solution in the big book. He asked me early on, this is to explain the third step to him. Is it around here somewhere? Yeah. So I said, well, Mac, I turned my will and life over to the care of God. And Mac said, well, no, Tom, explain it to me. And I said, well, Mac, it means that I turn my will and my life over to the care of God. He said, I can tell you don't know, so I'm going to tell you. He said it means to turn your thoughts, your will, and your actions, your life, over to the care of God. I'd been sitting in meetings for years, and I hadn't picked that up. Mac also said, sometimes it's very difficult to find the AA program, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. He told me that if I could have changed my thoughts or my actions, I certainly already would have. He introduced me to the Joe and Charlie Big Book study weekends, and I became friends with Joe, not so much with Charlie. And reading, understanding, and utilizing the Big Book in my life. I just got to tell you, though, that the whole subject of God still irritated me. I kind of skipped over it, just kind of ignored it. And Max pointed me to the chapter to the agnostic and the phrase, "Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself?" As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon such a simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. I wanted a flashing spiritual experience, but instead got a gradual and educational one that I'm still receiving. I was looking for a beanstalk type of spiritual experience that would go right up to God. But instead I got one of the horizontal variety. that extends to my family, my friends, my business associates, and the people that my church. The chapter to the agnostic also says, leaving aside the drink question, we show why life was so unsatisfactory. That, of course, meant the inventory. People in meetings have been talking. I didn't know that that wasn't an option. Just as alcohol was corroding my life before I admitted I was an alcoholic, character defects were corroding my life even before I knew I had them. Thankfully, Mac knew that I had far too many confusing philosophies in my mind and told me that I could only have the character defects that were mentioned in the Big Book because I wanted the promises that were in the Big Book. Those, I believe, are selfishness, dishonesty, self-seeking, fear, inconsideration, and self-pity. Correct me if I'm wrong, Professor. I didn't like any of those words. They sounded poor. They sounded bad, didn't they? That one would know that. That one would admit that. Mac assured me that they were just information and that the real work would begin with the following steps. Yet even these simple words I needed to learn within the context of AA. Selfishness for the purpose of the AA, I think, is defined right after how it works. It goes through with the actor wanting people to do as they wish, then everyone would be happy. He's got varied traits, and he's attempting to wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world by managing well. There's also the example of the clergyman sighing over the sins of the 20th century. When I do that, I become miserable. I become discontent. So that selfishness makes me miserable, and I need relief. Unfortunately, I now only know two ways to get relief. One is to drink, and the other is to accept the spiritual help as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I know there are other ways, but two is a big improvement over just one. It was my sponsors who taught me about honesty. I always thought it had to mean my interactions with others, and it does. Even more important, it means my learning being able to be honest with myself. I didn't know how to do that. By finding out about my dishonesty with myself and applying the 6th and 7th step to it, I'm automatically honest. Joe McQueenie said that you don't need to practice virtues. They appear automatically if the character defects are removed, even if only briefly. It's really the only way that I've ever been able to find the truth. Another step that I didn't like much was that 8th step. I didn't like the idea that I needed to admit that I was wrong. That's not done much in our family, is it, Amanda? This was when I thought that AA was kind of a Martha Stewart correctness course. And I want you to know that I wasn't good at that. I found out that purpose was to amend or change my thinking. During an inventory, I found out that I'd always feared people in authority positions because I thought that my well-being was in their hands. I found out through the inventory that that was very inconsiderate of me. They never asked for that, and that, of course, is the job of the higher power or God. Through extensive use of these steps, my spirit has been improved, where I've been able to receive aid from therapy and psychiatric medication that allow me to enjoy life and contribute to the joy of others. Sometimes I think that there are people in AA who have reached a spiritual level far in excess of the founders, Bob and Bill. And that reminds me of what Mac used to say about the 10-step. Continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear when these crop up. Not if you've been in AA for a long time, you don't have to worry about that, or if you did a great third step, or if you had a flashing spiritual experience. And so I found that to be very useful also. I'd now like to read something from Dr. Bob's story in the last paragraph of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is from Dr. Bob's story. It is the most wonderful blessing to be relieved of the terrible curse with which I was afflicted. My health is good, and I have regained my self-respect and the respect of my colleagues. My home life is ideal, and my business is as good as can be expected in these uncertain times. I spend a great deal of time passing on what I've learned to others who want and need it badly. I do it for 4 reasons. 1, a sense of duty. 2, it's a pleasure. 3, because by doing so, I am paying my debt to the men who took time to pass it on to me. And 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. I believe that this is as true for me today as it was for Dr. Bob when he wrote it. I see the same results in countless others. Meetings used to be ended with the following from page 164 of the Big Book. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. But obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. 1, 2, 3. Admit your faults to Him and your fellows. 4, 5, 6, and 7. Clear away the wreckage of your past. 8 and 9. Give freely of what you find and join us. 10, 11, and 12. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Thank you very much.